There we go. So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the last Germinator session for this current season of 2024-2025 academic year. I'm your host, Dr. Alon Eisenstein. I'm an assistant professor of teaching for technology entrepreneurship at UBCO Schools of Engineering. And for those of you who are joining for the very first time, just a quick context to understand the Germinator is a mostly bi-weekly webinar where I host people who have experience with innovation, technology, entrepreneurship, and all that jazz, and just listen to what they've experienced and their thoughts on their experiences in the world at large. As I often take the case to start by respectfully recognizing that I'm hosting this webinar from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Syilx Okanagan Nation. And because the topic of today is commercialization of technologies, I thought it would be just fitting to share a bit of the technology that I've learned that the Syilx have developed over generations for thousands of years. And this is not just for the Syilx, but the entire interior Salish indigenous communities. And so for us here in the interior of BC, the cold winters require heated homes. And so across the indigenous nations, there are different versions of what is known as a pit house. In some places, it's called a kekuli, and some other places it's called a kuchi, and there's a few other names as well. And it's a really ingenious design of habitat that once built, the wood holding the roof can hold several tons of dirt above it for insulation. And it carries the weight for the entire length of the winter. And it's so well insulated that in a video that I've seen an elder speak about the design features, beyond the cultural and the spiritual and the practical elements, the design for the insulation is so good that you basically light up the fire once in the morning to cook breakfast, and then you light it again in the evening for dinner, and it stays warm for the entire duration of the day and overnight as well, using stones to absorb the heat and the wood itself that absorbs some of the heat throughout the day and releases when the fire is out. And so with that, I would like to welcome my friend, my colleague, my collaborator, Dr. Andrew Maxwell. Dr. Andrew Maxwell, I'll just read out your bio very quickly for those who didn't do their homework and prepared for today. Andrew is the Bergeron Chair in Technology Entrepreneurship. He's the director of the Bergeron Entrepreneurs in Science and Technology, referred to as the BEST Labs or BEST Institute. I keep forgetting which one.
Not institute.
Not an institute.
No,
Best
it's
lab.
the best program, best lab.
It is the best of the best.
Yeah,
He
it's
received
nice
his,
because I'm the best professor at York University. It's nice to be called that.
yeah, and you have it in your signature. Andrew received his Ph.D. in Technology Entrepreneurship from University of Waterloo in 2011. He won the Academy of Management's Heizer Award for top Ph.D. in his field. He's the journal editor of the Journal of Business Venturing. And while at Waterloo, he taught capstone technology entrepreneurship class. He's been helping, mentoring, coaching, teaching technology entrepreneurs throughout his entire career. He also had previously worked for a few years at the Technology Transfer Office, which is the topic of our discussion today, at the University of Toronto, also teaching at Rotman and U of T Mississauga, and work experience including founding 4 technology companies, working with in 2 technology multinationals, and has an MBA from the London Business School and a Bachelor of Science in Engineering in Electrical Engineering from Imperial College London. Andrew, it's so good to have you here, and
Thank you, Alan.
actually as my last guest for this year.
Well, yep, end of term coming soon.
Yes, for those who are teaching are looking with glazing eyes towards the finish line. So Andrew, we talked a bit in the planning for a title for today's talk, and you suggested why Technology Transfer Office is an oxymoron. before we get to the punchline, I wonder if we can start, if you can start by just kind of sharing a bit of a synopsis of your experience and what you've seen over the years about this whole idea of technology commercialization, from being at the tech transfer office at U of T so many years through your Ph.D. that I know you have some fun stories to tell about your research with the Dragon's Den, and decision and how people make decisions on investment and what you're doing at York these days.
So thank you. Yeah, it's kind of interesting. So, I went back to school late in life to do my PhD because I realized that universities didn't know how to teach tech entrepreneurship. They had no idea what commercialization was, and in fact, they were kind of designed to do the opposite. And it was a big challenge. And I was at U of T at the time, so my background was worked in big tech companies, started 4 companies of my own, like starting but not finishing. That's a kind of joke in my family as well. And so I thought, well, why not go to U of T and they must be doing startups? I found out they don't do startups. 2001, we just license out stuff, mainly medical, and that's it. And I said, well, if you ever want to do startups, I think I've got some insights. And 3 weeks later, I got a call from Tech Transfer Office, the guy running it, saying, I think we might have a couple of things that need to be startups. Incidentally, both of them were undergraduate student startups. And so I joined 1 day a week, 2 days a week, it became like 11 days a week. Started the first technology incubator in a university in Canada called the Accelerator, which basically became part of Mars when Mars was started. And while I was there, one of the things when you meet a bunch of curious people, especially in that environment, and you've been there too, Alan, you ask questions about what are we doing, what's wrong, what's going on. And I would talk to faculty, many Rotman faculty, who would explain things to me based on the research. And what they were saying was absolutely right, but no one was applying that research into practice. So, like, how do people make decisions? How do you teach? And it was like, well, we'll do that, but over here on this side, we're just going to ignore the research. So I decided I wanted to change how universities work and how they function, how they support this. And I thought it was really central as a person who chose engineering, because I thought engineering would give us solutions to important problems. I thought it was essential. I decided whether it was well guided or misguided to do a PhD. Obviously, you would know that the best place to do a PhD in tech entrepreneurship is Waterloo, partly because they don't have a business school, which is my comment before to Eric. I apologize. And by the way, to this day, I don't think Waterloo really understand why they're so good at tech entrepreneurship. But I did write some papers on it. I did talk to various senior people in it, and they've doubled down on it. So it's not like they don't encourage it and foster it and try and do things to make it happen. But I don't think they really understand. So I've done that, and in the discussions about what we might talk about, what I realized is that a lot of people make assumptions about the role of technology transfer and the function of technology transfer offices that are fundamentally flawed. And I started writing about this in 2010, based on my research and my experience. And not much has changed, and people are making like crazy comments. So, for example, I was talking to Rod McNaughton, who used to be at Waterloo and he's now Professor of Entrepreneurship in New Zealand. And he turned around and he said, well, New Zealand just changed its policy for universities to invent-owned, and that's going to solve all their problems. And he and I were joking, saying, well, first of all, I'm a massive fan of invent-owned. We can talk about that till the cows come home. But it doesn't solve the problem because then you still have to do the work just because you've changed who owns it, unless you understand the consequences of that. So I decided to start talking about it a bit more and got the opportunity to be on your Germinator, and happy to talk about some bits of that. And I think most importantly, for me, working on the preparation for this made me realize, one, how much I've written, two, how much there is still to talk about, and three, that there's probably a book in my head on it. So I wrote a book. Like when I say that, it's like draft. So I'm kind of hoping that during the course of the conversation today, people share their thoughts, insights, feedback, counter positions, or cases, examples, because that's definitely something I want to put in, about the issue of the function of technology transfer in universities.
So maybe this is a good time to kind of, call out the elephant in the room. What are some of the assumptions that people assume about technology transfer, commercialization that they get wrong? And I think, I can already kind of, circle that square and say, I think for most people, they know that the single biggest output of research, academic research, is words and papers, right? Theses and publications. Um, but still, I think every university has a tech transfer office, and I've had lots of conversations, including last night over dinner, about what is it that people don't know and think wrong or right about technology transfer and its role in the university.
Well, let me start by definitions, right? Words are important, and it's actually I don't like the phrase that we came up with for the title, which is technology transfer office is an oxymoron, because I don't think it's an oxymoron, but it gives the wrong message, if I was the best way to describe it. And
Mm.
so let me describe that because, and by the way, I worked in tech transfer. Obviously, I've worked with some people that are doing fantastic job. I mean, this is not a criticism of the individuals working there. It's the context and the expectations. So let me do that, and then I want to go back to your comment about research outcomes. So, academic, technology, transfer office. Let's talk about the three things. Technology. Well, the first thing is that it's not just technology, because that implies that everything is solid and codified, and therefore somehow you can license it somewhere else. Whereas inside the creation of new ventures and even licensing, there's a whole load of tacit knowledge as well. So it's not just technology, but it's technology, know-how, experience. The joke or the comment that we always make is the biggest knowledge mobilization that happens from universities is called graduation, and we kind of forget that. So I think by calling it technology, you basically pigeonhole it into something which is small, but it could be much bigger, and especially in the context of venture creation, which obviously I'm an entrepreneurship professor, so I would espouse. The second one is the concept of the word transfer, and that kind of has the idea of a one-way flow of knowledge from the university to the community, to industry, to consumers, which is kind of how we do it on the research papers, although anyone that publishes knows that that can start dialogues and conversation. But anyone that kind of embeds design thinking into what they do know that it's two-way and that you need to have conversations both ways. So it's not transfer, it's conversation. And then finally, the word office implies that you can physically do it in one location. It happens over there, in U of T, it was the south side of college. We can't have this office on campus because it pollutes the purity of the academic spirit. Whereas it's actually kind of a networking, collaboration, catalytic activity that spreads well beyond the office, well beyond the boundaries of university. So the reason I kind of came up with the title is I think all of those three words kind of set you in the wrong direction. And the final comment I wanted to make, which is the one that you kind of just raised, which is research outcomes. And this is actually, in a way, the most damaging and the most fundamental problem. We highly value research outcomes in universities. And research outcomes are published papers. And that there's nothing wrong with published papers. But how you get a good published paper is completely different from how you get a technology or a product or tacit knowledge that you could commercialize and create value for users. To start with, when you're doing user-centric research, you would say, what do people need? Right? And that's not how we approach the academic. So if you look at all the criteria, and again, I have a paper on this, for success in getting a published paper and for success in a commercial product or a product that's used in the market, but to me that's the definition of commercial success, they're diametrically opposed. And you virtually can never do both at the same time. You have to choose one or the other. And so, just as an example, in the academic world, if you came out and you said, I have a paper and my technology works 80% as well as the best technology out there, and you tried to publish that, you wouldn't get it published. But if you said, but it's 10% of the cost, then you might have a market. So the criteria for publishing and for market is different. And even things like bad results, you can't publish, oh, we didn't find anything. But on the commercializing side, you absolutely need to talk about what went wrong, otherwise you can't improve things and make it better.
I already have some ideas on how we should rebrand Tech Transfer Office, but I'll keep it in my head for a bit and save it for later. I did see Eric raise his hand, and I do like to keep the Germinator conversational with the audience. So, Eric, do you still have your question, or did we get did you
No,
get your
I just joined the conversation. Maybe I think that's the goal for today's meeting. But I totally agree with you, Andrew. But I think for most of the time I'm the academic side, and then so we just focus on publish and publish and publish, or publish or perish, and then so that's how we quote unquote survive in the academic system. But we are just missing so many opportunities to kind of like really translating or transferring. So what we found through our research process into, but I think maybe going back to a little bit, is related to the training as well. So because again, if you're doing a PhD program for that, to some extent, you're building up your specialties in certain area that enables you to kind of like fly through the academic process for that. But no one in the PhD program will train someone is how to start up your own kind of like companies for that, or how you run through the budgetings and human resources, those components, which is quite essential as a startup or when you talk about commercializing your innovations for that. I think that would be a very interesting gap for that. So to me, for that, is that a PhD program need to be structured, or we are talking about like tenure track, and then so we should present more opportunity and start recognizing those opportunities for, let's say, early career, mid careers, and then so faculty members. To me, for that, it would be some incentives potentially university or higher education system can kind of like put together to just make sure, because at the end of the day, for that, the university would benefit because it's a commercialization process, and university usually have a cut, at least like in Canadian context. But anyway, for that, I just want to join the conversations for that. Thank you, Andrew. Yeah. Yeah.
You raise a bunch of issues, and I could go off for one, but and Alan knows this. That's something that we've actually been actively working on, I guess, almost 15 years now. We have a graduate course called Tech Commercialization. It actually, I had the similar version of the course when I was teaching at Rotman, and the idea is to take research outcomes while they're still in research, and I'm talking about really engineering research, and embed design thinking and business model innovation and value proposition creation into the research, so that at the end of the day, the emerging research is better suited to meet user needs and therefore more likely to be able to be commercialized. We know that the single biggest reason for failure is lack of product market fit. Well, this course is about finding product market fit. And I say Alan knows because he has some of his students taking my course, because we offer it as a global course, but global at the moment is York and UBC.
so maybe that's a good touch up to ask again. And you mentioned this from a research perspective, you can't do both, optimize for publication and optimize for commercialization. And I think part of the challenge, and it's a time management and priority challenge for academics, researchers in general. You have let's focus on PhDs just because it has a 4-year runway, so slightly more practical than a master's. But if you have a 4-year runway, how early should you start navigating, or like even putting the red pill, blue pill to the student and say, which pill should you take? Where are we heading? Is it halfway through day one, before they even say I agree and join your group?
Well, it's an interesting question. It's an interesting question for different people, and they'll ask it at different points. I want to challenge your assumption that this is around PhD students. Most of my activities are with undergraduate students and master students. So I think it's, it can be and faculty, by the way, we have faculty taking the course too. But I think that the reality is this, and I try to persuade my research-focused colleagues. The question I want to ask is, why are you doing that research? What is the purpose of doing that research? And in an engineering school, I'm going to say, maybe I'm being optimistic or rose-tinted glasses or something, solving a problem. We want to solve a problem. We have so many challenges in the world, and technology can address many of them. And so I think it's really important that we focus on solving a problem, and then you ask that question, who are you solving the problem for? What would a good solution like? So as you are, my basic comment would be that as you start working on a project, you should in parallel identify who has a problem you're solving. Because then when you came to junctions in the road about approaches you're going to take or features you're going to focus on, then you're better prepared to answer that. So when again, talking to research colleagues, it's like this course, which they think is an airy-fairy, arts course or social science course, is actually, why are you doing your research? That's what the course is. And it starts off by saying, I want to do this to solve this problem. And sometimes, often they come into the class and they've started to solve a problem, but they don't know who they're solving it for or why. And so the minute they start to be in that situation, that's when they should take the course, because it says who you're solving for and why, and what do they need and what's an outcome.
Okay.
Bob, you have your hand
Yeah.
up.
Yeah, and I was just gonna tie it back to your comment about not just PhDs. I agree. I guess my point on the PhD was more from a researcher's perspective, utilizing your PhDs to do part of your research. But that's not always true, and sometimes students bring their own ideas.
Well,
And
I think that's true.
yeah,
Also, the dean of engineering at Waterloo just made a comment. I mean, she made several comments about their 5-year plan, and one of them was to embed research into every undergraduate student's experience. I think that's a really great insight. I think it transforms how we think about the education experience for and I'm an engineering student. I think I strongly believe in that. I have about 45 over the last 3 years, undergraduate students working on physical research projects, mainly to do with my electric vehicle project. And the lessons they learn and the insights they get from that are enormous. And so you need to teach them those questions. And if I was and every engineering student, I think, does a capstone project. So for me, big market is capstone students. Why are you doing that research? And most capstone students either solve a problem that they've identified, which is great, or solve a problem that someone else has identified. Either way, this approach helps them get to better solutions, better answers, and better decisions.
yeah. Barb, you have your hand raised.
Yeah,
Yes.
I just want to join this conversation because I really want to agree with what Andrew's talking about with the undergraduates. I'm trained in the Ivy Business School in the Dragon's Den pitching, and in our second year tech class, I doing tech pitches next week, and so they're all presenting to me tech ideas, and I had to break the curriculum into a different order, but it really works, and they're pulling it together and doing all the design thinking with the business model canvas and the value proposition. And then I bring my research elements and the trends of technology to it and give them real problems out there and kind of scope it and says, okay, if you're going AI in this way, here's the scoping. So I think we absolutely can do it. And I would also go back and challenge along your statement that we can't do good publications and good practice outcomes. I know I was trained that we didn't have a real research problem until it had kind of the problem, a good conceptual idea of how we're going to organize it, and a practice that is going to change, right? So And so we had to keep looking for research topics and when in my training until those three were taken care of. So I think us all making steps in these directions are good, right? So yeah, I think having more conversations about how we can integrate across these curriculums is also really important. So I'm starting my entrepreneur boot camp again in a fourth year class in the fall. So I'll be doing where the students and predominantly management will be doing a tech pitch of a company that they'll want to start, right? So, and Alon, I know you haven't attended it, but your colleagues have, and so I get lots of matching into the engineering faculty so that when my students say, I need an engineer to do this, we go, okay, there's one. And we do some matching events and it's phenomenal, right? So I think we can with a few tweaks and approaches to how we hold ourselves to those, combining all of those things together.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can see in my own entrepreneurship course, the engineering students are really challenged by the idea of thinking of a customer and understanding what does it mean to actually embrace customer-centric approach. Which again, maybe going back to your comment, Andrew, about why are you doing your research? Again, my experience has been seeing a lot of the focus and attention is from a project mindset. It's a one and done. I have one singular problem for one singular person. I need to solve that problem for them, optimize it for them, and that's not a business in most cases. And so having the mindset of customer plural as a group of people and understanding that there's need to do more than just a one-off activity, I think is part of the mindset that I see is challenging for a lot of engineers because that's how they've been trained from day one, essentially.
Well, I agree with the exception that I designed the first year course for all our engineering students. So all of our engineering students have to do one of our hackathons. You've been familiar because you've helped with them.
Mm.
In the first term that they're there, they have to address UN sustainability goal. But the hackathon is open to students from across the university. And so we really try to encourage students from different disciplines, health, psychology, business, social sciences, to join and form teams, and that makes a much stronger, more relevant outcome.
Yeah.
And then in our second term course, they have to pitch, right? The final presentation is a pitch, and so we prepare them for that and give them feedback with the hope that they start it in year one and somehow
Yeah.
by year 3 or 4 they've got to some solution that can have some value for somebody.
Yeah, and I think this kind of ties to discussions I've had with other people about why our university is so bad at cross-pollinating across programs and degrees, and I think doing out of class events like hackathons and Barb's boot camp are really great ways to overcome the siloing of course codes and departments and all that. Um, I wanna kind of be mindful that I feel like we're kind of went slightly away from our focus on tech transfer office, quote unquote, and we're talking about the role of the researcher, where students play a part, undergrad, grad. Um, so what is the role? I mean, what should the tech transfer office, badly titled, should play? Um, and beyond just the legalese licensing agreements to work with the legal team, is there a place for them? Because we're really talking about we need more courses, we need earlier courses, we need more cross-pollination. None of it feels like it sits with the tech transfer office. So what role should they have in all of this?
Well, I think you're kind of raising some comments that link to the idea of why we put the title together, which is, first of all, they shouldn't sit in that office. They should sit in our classrooms and our research lab. So if you're working in a tech transfer office, you should spend half your time in the labs or in the classes, or, especially the project classes. So when I have my events and competitions, I usually have people from Tech Transfer Office come and provide some support and insights and that very valuable feedback. So they often have additional perspectives. Bob talked about trends and things. Whether we like it or not, there are definitely trends, things that are going to get traction and things that are not going to get traction. And so people that work out in the real world tend to be able to bring those insights. So I think the first thing is that as you start to use experiential learning and problem solving and design thinking to frame your research, then the people from the Tech Transfer Office can provide additional insights. Maybe I want to come back to this. Maybe it's on patenting, maybe it's on alternate ways to get to market, or they can actually go off at a tangent and say, well, let's go see if we can find an industry partner for you. Because the reality is, if you're sitting, literally, I had my class yesterday. I have 3 requests from people in the class. I need someone in industry that does this because I'm not, I've pivoted. I'm now trying to solve a problem in a different industry. It seems to be a good problem, but I need to find out how to explore it. And so I think that's a second function. Also, part of the issue is, well, 2 issues. The first one, and someone said this, I think, at the beginning, expectations of revenue. So it doesn't say that in the title of Technology Transfer Office. You won't make any money from running a Technology Transfer Office. Like statistically, 80% lose money and 10% kind of break even and 10% make money. So you're not very likely to make money. You certainly won't make money if you set up a venture fund and in general. Now, there may be a few places, MIT, for example, or Stanford, where that's not the case. But again, I have a paper comparing licensing revenue at U of T with donations from founders at Waterloo. And it's like 20 to 1, the donations from founders outweighs the licensing revenue. So I think, if you do it with the expectation of licensing revenue, it will get in the way. So I'm not suggesting that you don't occasionally need to do licenses, but that should not be a primary requirement. I think there's one other comment about licensing, and again, maybe I'm not answering your question, but in most cases, when you sign a license, you transfer your intellectual property to a remote company in a different destination. I'm not talking about licenses where you license a local startup, because that's the mechanism of getting out of the university, because that's still a startup. It's just a mechanism. But when most licenses go out, and therefore the value is created distant from the university. So I think licensing should be something you do if you can't do startup, because I don't think it creates as much value for the university, for the community, for the taxpayer that's funded the research. I think if you create local ventures, they have multiple ways they can add value back to university, from coming back into the class to teach the class, to being role models, mentoring at our hackathons, hiring students, doing research projects, sharing their experience. There are so many ways that the startup community, which you've seen, somewhat at Toronto, definitely you see it at Waterloo, and I think, if you embrace the vision of what the Tech Transfer Office should be trying to do, one thing they should be doing is alumni relations with all the founders and bringing them back on campus. So again, I have a paper about that, but it's like there's so many benefits to having these entrepreneurial founders that are still linked into your ecosystem that should be a function of what they're doing. And then finally, part of the challenge with TTOs is they kind of tend to have one model. We'll bring it in, we'll evaluate it. I don't know how they evaluate it. And then we'll do a license, and then we'll try and negotiate a license. And there are so many ways that really promising ideas kind of get stuck because there's no way going through the process. So I think that they need to view their role not as gatekeepers, but more as marketplaces. I think, and maybe marketplace is the wrong way, but some way of connecting together the different people and facilitating. So if there are events or whatever, or the people want to come on campus, they become the vehicle for catalyzing those interactions rather than the gatekeeper for transferring codified knowledge to a particular user.
Okay. So I think I can share what I thought of rebranding the Tech Transfer Office, because you were kind of breaking down the 3 bad words. How about knowledge co-creation network? Does that capture the spirit of what you're proposing.
I just, I mean, absolutely, and I love those words, honestly. I mean, I just did a paper on knowledge mobilization, the future of university. So there's definitely some things in there. I think, I think that, you know, words are important, and the words you use are important, and so I think careful crafting of that would be important. But you can't just change the name; you have to change the function, the policies,
Yeah,
etc. And again, you know, go back because someone made a comment about it. I think institutional ownership of IP is evil. I can't think of an organization that is less well prepared to support venture creation, because I'm a big venture creation guy, than the university. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, you know, but I just, I wouldn't have them start a business for me. And by the way, there's a few good people who go in tech transfer office, and what they do, well, they leave to start a business, right? So it's actually difficult to keep them there, and that entitlement ownership, it actually acts as a disincentive because researchers, two things, researchers lose ownership, and we all know about how important ownership is. I don't mean financially important, I mean emotionally important. It's my baby, and I'm going to make sure that it's successful. In fact, sometimes we keep going too long when we should stop. So, you know, that is another issue. But we kind of break the chain. And also by having this function in the middle, we say, oh, you're a researcher. You don't have to worry about that. Just keep doing your research and then we'll take care of it at the end. So first of all, in a tech transfer, most of the stuff you get is not got any commercial value. And even if you have, there's very little incentives for people on the research side to actually engage in that. In fact, massive disincentives. I mean, I was always told, especially at U of T, don't engage with the tech transfer office. It's a distraction from tenure and promotion. And it's not measured on tenure and promotion. And so what's kind of needed is a fundamental overhaul of the approach and the system. And I think one final thing, I I think everybody, especially people in universities, are probably thinking differently about universities and the future of academia than I am at York. But it's no surprise that York is in a big financial predicament. And if I was giving advice to someone, it would not be to do a PhD to go for an academic career. I think universities are about for a big overhaul. I think we're going to change the way we teach. We're going to change what we do. We change our functions. Do I think they're important? Absolutely. But, you know, Kodak was important and Blockbuster was important and a bunch of other people, and they've all been disrupted. So I see massive changes. So I don't really encourage anyone to pursue academic research for an academic position, just because I don't think there'll be that many of them out there. But that educational process and then using it in industry or using it to improve government policy, I think there's lots of opportunities. So it's not that I don't think people should do graduate degrees. I think that we have a kind of one-size-fits-all view of the world, that you're going to go and be a faculty person. Because, by the way, that's what your PhD supervisor did. So
yeah.
they're not really the best person to guide you because, you know, it's difficult.
It reminds me when I was back at the University of Toronto, somebody commented about going to get career advice from the Career Center, and they said that the best advice career centers can give you is how to become a professional career center professional, because that's what they are. So they can help you get there, which is, you know, I don't think it's that bad. But I think yeah, we role model ourselves into our protege.
But
Um,
that also goes to a point, because you asked me about the role of TTO.
yeah,
If your role of a TTO is facilitating interactions with industry partners and people that have problems, then that's actually a great way to learn about where you're going to find your career. Because first of all, you might find it in the business that you help create to solve that problem, but you're suddenly out there in the real world solving problems for real people, and you hopefully will find your passion.
yeah. I want to take a bit pause here and ask if anybody wants to interject with questions or comments to what we've been talking about. Um, I know there's a few people here in the room that I know I've had other discussions on similar topics in the last little while as well.
I have a question. Very nice to meet you, Andrew. Thanks a lot for organizing. Uh, I have a background in the TTO, in a couple different universities and things like that. I listen to the problems that you're talking about. You talk about the disruptions coming. Can you sort of explain what you see is coming? I see in Canada there's a lot of the, UBC Okanagan, UILO owns the idea and they license it out. It's as simple and pure as that. I was in the UK at a couple different universities where you could own the idea and you could take that idea and there was different structures where the university would take shares in your startup and in your incorporation and things like that. They also had different incentives of quick agreements where they would just take 5%, 10%, and things like that. A lot of these are known universities and things. What is your sort of thoughts of what's happening in Canada? I see, I've heard from a couple of people on this call that, UILO owning something and you license it out and barely own 50%. And, and your comments are very forthright and the university doesn't understand commercialization.
So let me ask you. I made comments. So I made comments apropos the massive disruption of academia in whole, as general, and also about the tech transfer of it. So is your question about the future, how universities are evolving, which is
No,
a long podcast?
directly how the tech transfer office, what's going to happen in your opinion?
So I think that so a lot of so there's a whole bunch of myths perpetrated, and I'm not sure why, and a lot of it is historical. So if you go back to when Bayh-Dole was approved as a legislative framework, it was because a lot of research, especially medical biotech research, ended up sitting in the university, and no one had the incentive to do anything with it. And the researchers were never incented to do anything, and so they created this institutional ownership. And the idea of that was to put the onus on the university to do something about it. So it wasn't, hey, here's some money. It was, now you're responsible. And so I think it kind of goes back to my point. The minute that you make the university responsible, then the inventor's not responsible. So that's part of the problem. So I think that might have been appropriate, certainly very appropriate in most of the biotech stuff that I've been involved in, because at the end of the day, the process for commercializing is long. There's FDA approvals and medical trials and stuff. And most of faculty researchers are not really interested in that. But I have examples. An undergraduate student who started a business in one of my programs, not last summer but the previous summer. His now business is now doing $5 million of revenue. He's not raised any external capital. And that's kind of the norm, especially with all the AI stuff coming. So I think that what you're going to see is that technology transfer offices need to get out of the way. But they can play a role because that person doesn't know how to structure a licensing agreement. They don't know how to get good advice on patents or whatever. And so I don't think that's a role that faculty should play. I think it's a role that could definitely be played. And Bob made a comment before about developing skills. So I try to do something inside our engineering school that develops some of the skills necessary, but I don't do a great job of it because I only control a few of the courses. There's a bunch of skills that will really help our undergraduate students and our graduate students in that entrepreneurial world where they're making a career for themselves versus going to work in a big company, because that's not the job of the future. That we could help them better prepare, whether it's for a job in their own company or an entrepreneurial company. I mean, there's things we could do to help them in big companies, but the number of jobs in big companies is going down. The number of jobs in the entrepreneurial, innovative companies is going up. And, so are you comfortable with ambiguity? How do you manage ambiguity? What happens if you get conflicting instructions or insights? All of these things we could embed. So I think, again, the paper I wrote was about combining the tech transfer office and the career center together. It was like we should have one way of managing how you transition knowledge from universities to the real world and from the real world back to universities. So I think there's massive roles they could play, but it's going to require cultural change, policy change, expectation change, and ultimately, in a way, selling the financial benefits to the university of a not IP ownership. I mean, that paper that I did before comparing U of T with Waterloo, that was its main agenda. I mean, in that period that I did the research, licensing revenue for U of T was $2.5 million. Donations from entrepreneurial founders to U of W was $70 million. And, David Johnson, who was the president at that time, used to say, I don't need license revenue, just get me some successful entrepreneurs. And so that culture has to come right from the top, and people have to realize it. And I think one other comment I want to make, because I think it's a very misguided, old-fashioned, I would say, perspective, is that patenting is the answer. Because in my experience, most of the patenting is a way when you kind of got a company to stop other people doing what you're doing. But we introduce it as a concept too early, and we use it as a weapon when it's not the right weapon, and it's only as good as your ability to defend it anyway. So I think, I'm not saying patenting isn't a component of what you should do, but there's a reliance on it. And so there's a whole bunch of stuff that comes out from, I'm not going to name people, but people in Canada and to some extent in the US, where there's an over-reliance on patenting and an under-reliance on meeting user needs. Because you need, in the technology, most of the technology spaces I work in, the technology changes every 2 years. So the patent process is too long and too expensive. So it's not relevant. You need to find ways to think about it, but you don't just assume that, oh, patent it and that will defend you.
Barb, I see your hand is up again.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to get in this conversation about changing the culture to thinking about local entrepreneurs and not the licensing costs. I was at University of Calgary before I went out to industry in 2003, and they were making the same mistakes that UBC is making right now of constraining everything and being the gatekeeper, as Andrew was talking about. And after a number of successful local companies, gave back more in donations, they then changed some of those policies. But here at UBC, we have fundamentally constrained our innovation process in our office. So we have to really go and sell that and show the evidence that we can get more money from the entrepreneurs who will donate back and create the great ecosystem around us instead of going somewhere else in the world, right? So anyway, I just wanted to just reinforce that I think that's a great point and some shifts we have to work on.
I think you're absolutely right, Barbara, and I think that one of the things that I noticed when I did my initial research was this comment that most licensing's to somewhere remote, and
Yep.
most new ventures are local, right? Not always, and if you look from a economic perspective or a tax perspective at the impact of local ventures on hiring, on research, on co-op positions, it's massive. So honestly, if I create, and we have several that we've helped create, if I create a company here that then hires 20 or 30 of my graduate students, that's incredibly valuable, right? Incredibly valuable. And so it's more valuable than if I got a license from that or even equity. So I think that there is an increasing recognition of the value of local venture creation, of entrepreneurship. And we kind of need to change what the equation is. It's not revenue, it's impact. And it needs to be impact. It can be both economic impact and they're going to say, hopefully, sustainability impact, solving some of the big challenges.
Thank you.
Rick.
Yeah, I'd like to build on this idea that successful entrepreneurs can be donors to the university. There's lots of great examples of it all over the place, but it's much broader than that. These entrepreneurs typically become angel investors in their local community to support the next generation of early stage startups that might be coming out of the universities. and or other sources in the local community. Furthermore, myself as an example, we love to come back and be mentors and help and coach and advise those next generation of students and faculty that might want to start something. So it's much, much broader than just the gift giving back to the endowments.
Yeah, so 100%. So we just ran 2 weeks ago our startup experience. It's a weekend event. It's for undergraduate students, although some of our, a couple of our master students just take part because there's no requirement. And we run it, we have, last weekend we had 320 undergraduate students there the whole weekend in person. We had 40 mentors. And every one of those mentors had been a student in one of our programs in the last 5 years. So their ability to interact with the university in the short term is great. In addition, they've all been trained in the approach that we take, this design thinking stage process. So they don't send people off at a tangent, which some other people do. And I think it's valuable. And if you were to ask, I mean, I know this is kind of defeating, but if you ask someone in alumni donations, what is the biggest predictor that someone will give you money back? Is if they continued to interact with the university after they've graduated. And so I'm not really, it's great to get a big amount of money, but the reality is I would rather have an engaged community of alumni because there's all sorts of ways that adds value.
Absolutely.
One more point, if I could, on the skills building for the tech transfer officers. There really should be some kind of business training for these folks. I can't tell you how many times I've had to go and negotiate these licenses, and they have no idea what a 3% royalty, what that means to the net operating margin of a company. You try to say those terms to them, and it's like their eyes just glass over, and it just like they lose total concept of anything you're talking about. A company with a net operating margin of 30% can easily digest the 3% royalty. A company with a 9% net operating margin with a 3% royalty is looking at a 33% hit on the bottom line. They're just two totally different things, but they can't understand it at that level from my experience. So there needs to be some business training for these people negotiating license terms.
Absolutely. There's also a whole bunch of early stage venture capitalists who, when they see universities have, so if you do a startup and the university takes equity in the company, they run away because their experience is that percentage of equity just gets in the way. There's deals on the how the ownership conditions, shareholder agreements, etc. So I'm not suggesting that universities shouldn't aspire to earn some money, but you need to do it without conditions, so that it's just here's a bonus because your company started. So I think we need to think about that, and I think
and do it on flexible terms that are appropriate for the individual ventures.
100%, and that's the problem. It's like one size fits all. We do this and it's the licensing model. We do this and it's the venture creation model, and absolutely, it's often not appropriate.
So I'm looking at the clock, and we are getting really close to the hour. So, Rick, thank you for the questions, and I'll maybe Andrew, if you have one last thought, message to the I guess. I think you're preaching to the choir. I think everybody I can see on this call is a converted, adamant supporter of everything that you just said. So any final last message to compel us to go and talk to our presidents and our deans and our business office and our tech transfer office?
So I think, and someone asked for it. I'm going to find a way to link some of the stuff that's my publications to you, Alan, so you can send it out to everyone. I think we have some great data. I think we have some great insights. I think the people that really care and have practical insights, all of this resonates with them. So I think it's really actually, the strength will come from having a community of practice. So a community of people that are working together, that refuse to accept the old ways, that challenge the assumption that license revenues are what makes us successful, that focus on venture creation, and that can share our experiences. And some of us will win, and some of us might need help from each other. I mean, there are several universities that I've spoken to at high levels where I've shared my insights, and I have to be honest and say they like them, but find it challenging to change the institutional mandate. So I don't know what will happen. I have a feeling, we have Waterloo that has invent-owned. York University has invent-owned. There are a few. I think Simon Fraser as well, right? Am I right?
I don't know.
No. Anyway,
Maybe.
but I think we need to be more vocal on what works and what doesn't, and more vocal on what gets in the way.
Yeah. And maybe kind of last point on that is, as you alluded to before, inventor owned is not a magic solution. That's not enough in it on itself. It's part of the problem, but we need to be more proactive in building a living organic network of partners in and outside of the university. And I can definitely say from our location in the Okanagan, I just attended the IEEE annual event this past weekend, and the president of IEEE Canada came and talked and said, I had a job as an engineer when I graduated in the Okanagan, and then the company was purchased, and that was the only engineering job in the valley, so I had to relocate, and now I'm back so many years later, and it has changed to the better, but we are still seeing our alumni not staying as much as we would like them to see in the valley. And your point on licensing for a remote company as opposed to investing in local talent to build more local talent is really a dire need and a big priority for us here in the valley in the Okanagan. I just want to very lastly and quickly just share back my slide with everybody and just give everybody a big heads up that, where's my next slide? So I want to take the opportunity to first and foremost thank Andrew Maxwell for being my last guest for this academic year. I had an amazing time talking with a fabulous array of people for this year, including Jamie, Tyson, Jill, Ray, Kitan, Dawn, Corey, and Carol. Some of them are already here on the call or were on the call just before. And I'm looking forward to next year to see more amazing people and have these conversations on innovation, technology, and entrepreneurship that we need more of in not just here, but across academia and higher education. So if you want to stay up to speed on future events, you can sign up on my website, ewil.ok.ubc.ca. And once that mailing list is set up, I typically send an email and letting people know of the upcoming guests that will happen starting September of 2025. Thank you everyone for your time. Andrew, thank you for the voice and the vocal thought process and the challenging ideas that you're presenting us to fight on for a better future for all of us.
Thank you so much.
Okay, bye everyone. Have a good rest of the week.
Thanks. Bye.
Alon, thanks for setting it up.